Good morning and welcome to the latest installment in the Chief Value Officer series. Today we're going to be talking about forecasting and how to add value through a well-built forecast. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. A little bit of housekeeping today. If you have any questions, please submit them through the questions tab. If you're having technical difficulties, please click support or visit the website there, support.goto.com/webinar. In the follow-up after the webinar, you'll receive an email containing the presentation slides we go through today, a link to the recording, and access to other webinars in the series, plus also the speaker contact details today. So today the conversation is just with myself and my fellow partner Fahim Khondaker. Nick Fox, I lead the Chief Value Officer program within Australia and Asia Pacific for a BDO. Fahim is an amazing partner with us. He leads our digital data analytics and AI practice. Fahim, do you want to say hello and quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on this call, Nick. Thank you for everyone joining in the short week that is between Easter and Anzac Day as well. So really appreciate the time. Hopefully the conversation's of value. I don't know if it'll go for the full hour today or not, but please feel free to ask any questions as you see fit. My angle, while I lead data and AI, I am an accountant. I am a chartered accountant myself. And I'm also a part-time professor at University of New South Wales, where we are doing a lot of work in the domain of accounting, where I'm actually helping oversee reframing the accounting program over there. And one of the things we're working on is introducing commercial acumen to our accounting degree, of which forecasting will play a key role. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Nick, and let's see where it goes. Just for the audience's benefit, we're actually not absolutely 100% certain how deep and which rabbit holes we'll go down today. So let's see how. I'm really looking forward to that conversation.
No, absolutely, and thank you very much for him for taking the time. As you mentioned, it is a short week for everyone, so we do appreciate you taking the time out and everyone joining this webinar today to see this. So, what I wanted to quickly touch upon is coming back into the Chief Value Officer model. We're having a look at a model of value. So, when we have a look at how that model of value works, basically, we have a look at the enablers, the converters, and then the recipients of value within the value chain, effectively looking at all the different elements that come into it. Now, the reason why I wanted to quickly bring this up was to really come into how forecasting can add value throughout this chain. If you have a look at the enablers, if you have a look at the converters, and you have a look at the recipients of value, forecasting actually comes through all these different layers. Basically, we need to also think about budgeting and forecasting in the same breath. They are two different and separate things, but they are also quite linked. I'm going to have a quick stab at the way that I view it, and then I'm going to quickly have a pass on it for him to think about budgeting versus forecasting. My view of a budget is effectively it's the beginning of the year. You set a budget that is effectively what your target is for that year in terms of your revenue and expenses within a business context. Basically, what are you going to spend your money on, and how much do you think you're going to need for the full year in terms of targets, etc. That's a budget. A forecast is actually more actuals. Where do you think you're going to land? It's more of a short-term view, and effectively, what is actually going to happen in the short term. So, very quickly for him, what's your take on a budget versus a forecast?
Yeah, it means slightly different things in my world, actually, Nick. So,
That's good.
forecasting in my world of data analytics is about predictive modeling and predicting the future of where you're headed. So, quite often we talk about forecast models and predictive models in the same breath. Whereas I think in the finance context, a forecast is often a noun. So in my world, forecasting is a verb. You are forecasting, predicting, estimating the future. Whereas I think in the context in finance, quite often it's seen as a noun, which is quite often I hear the term revised budget, which technically doesn't exist, but that's a notion, or like it's the latest cut of where we think we're going to land, as you said, or what if we had more the information we now have, if we had it at the time of budgeting, our budget would have looked like this. So it's an actual thing that matches up to the budget from a line by line basis. So it's quite interesting that in my head, forecasting can be both a verb and a noun, and it's really really important that you get that distinction right in terms of the conversation you're going to have. Um, in my world, especially given I do a lot of analytics with finance teams, whether that be with FP&A or a data analytics team in an organization, the conversation we will often have is about looking ahead, looking at drivers, and we'll get into that discussion about value drivers in a second. But then using that information to land on where we think we're going to land. And in my head, where I've drawn the distinction is once we're fairly comfortable that we've got a view of where we're going to land in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, let's lock that in and formally issue that as a forecast and make our dashboards have both the original budget, a new revised, either a revised budget or forecast, whatever you want to call it, so that the business can use that to compare performance against.
I think that's a really good viewpoint. I think, my view from a budget perspective is that it is locked in, it's sealed, whereas I think a forecast is actually a lot more malleable or changeable. So I think when you're thinking about a budget versus a forecast, I like to go back to where I first had a good chat with a group financial controller from Qantas, and they talked about having a budget process where they started in September, they ended in about May, but on 1 July, when the budget came into effect, you saw the dollar drop, fuel prices went up, and the whole budget was gone. So what was the value of that budget? It needed to be more flexible. So they started moving on to forecasting, or they were talking about moving on to forecasting at the time. I'm not 100% sure whether they actually have moved on to forecasting, but in effect, it's
Yeah,
it's more
that's
of a flexible thing.
I think that's also a really good point. I think there's a layer of governance associated with the budget, like boards have to
Mm.
approve them and things like that as well. So I think you get a little bit more flexibility with the forecast. The other thing we'll probably note is if your full year forecast ends up being significantly materially different from the budget at a total level, I imagine there's governance clauses that get triggered where you need to get approvals again. However, I think
Mm.
a lot of people use forecasts to kind of manage to a budget. So they say if the budget was we're going to deliver $10 million revenue with $9 million expenses, and 3 months in, that's not looking good. You can have a forecast for the middle 6 months to take action to make sure you do end up at 9 million and 10, like I said in the example. So in which case you don't trigger any of those governance clauses again, right? So you don't need to go back to your board. You just give them an update saying, look, we're still on track for the budget for the end of financial year. However, our month to month forecasts have now changed and we're going to manage differently. So yeah, that governance layer is another reason why I think technically a budget is locked in, and I think that's right.
Yeah. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment or pause sharing because I think it'd be good to just now go into a bit more of a conversation. Um, in terms of actually building up a forecast versus a budget, I think it's really important to understand precisely what Finn was talking about in terms of the governance. Um, there is an element of governance that's involved with building a budget. You do get approvals, etc. I have a bit of a theory, and we sort of discussed this a little bit earlier for him, but sometimes budgets can create perverse outcomes, but also they can create other outcomes that are necessary. So the perverse outcome I always see, and people in this webinar have probably heard, is, oh, it's budget. We've budgeted marketing for $1 million. It's May now. We've only spent $500,000, so we've just got to get that money out the door. Otherwise, we lose it. So that's kind of a perverse outcome because that hasn't actually looked at whether or not we achieved all we needed to achieve from the marketing budget um, within the year for half the money because we were just great and efficient. The flip side is, and I think Fahim mentioned this just before, was effectively um, what happens. It's more of a are we just targeting not spending the money if we don't use it? So is there a different view here? So I think I can see perverse outcomes happening in budgeting, but I can also see perverse outcomes happening in forecasting as well. So what are your views on that? I mean, effectively, I can see
Yeah.
perverse outcomes. That whole we got $1 million in the budget, we need to spend it.
Yeah. And quite often, I feel like this is where I get brought into many organizations with an
Mm,
analytics hat on, and people turn their mind to, hey, for him, what's the drivers of our business and things like that. In my view, that's actually in the remit of finance still, and it's in
mm,
the remit of in this chief value officer model is what we're encouraging, right? We want finance professionals to be value drivers and value officers, essentially helping drive value. To that extent, one of the distinctions that I keep trying to make is the notion of an expense versus what is almost a pseudo investment, like an enabling
mm.
expense. So that marketing example is a really good one. Yes, you've come in under budget, but the one way to come in under budget is to not do any of the activities you were supposed to do, right? And you just
Yeah.
saved all the money. But that's not a good thing. That's not, because then you've lost out on the positives of that investment as well. Um, the flip side, which is the other one we have to distinguish on, is you've done everything you were supposed to do. You've just done it far more efficiently and cheaper, and you've saved some money. And the question then becomes, what's the best way to reallocate that fund? Do you leave it in marketing and spend more in marketing, or is the business mature enough that you can proactively allocate it to the best possible location in the organizations? And ultimately, I think what we're really talking about is proactive financial management, right? So,
Mm.
and this is where again we're getting into forecast being a verb, thinking
Yeah.
ahead, seeing where things are headed, and then appropriately taking the right action. And hopefully, we're in a position where we have enough visibility across the key value drivers of an organization, and we know that spending in, let's just say marketing, let's stick to marketing. If we know that for every dollar we spend in marketing, the company makes, I don't know, eight times more revenue, the goal should be wherever we've saved money without compromising quality across the organization, we should be funneling all that money to marketing to get that 8 times return. But
Yeah.
to get to that level of maturity and awareness in a large organization where all the value drivers are linked, and there's the governance and the process to allocate funds, and then there's the people element of not being seen as a bad manager because you've not spent all your money. There's a whole bunch of complicated things to work through to ultimately get to a point where you can influence that. And I think that's where the financial version of a forecast, the noun version, where we have a
Mm.
report that says this is where we're headed in the next 3 months, I think that's just a conversation starter. It's a firm document that says, here you go, guys. If we keep doing what we're doing, this is where we're going to end up. So what are we going to do about it? And I think that's a great conversation starter. And I think it's a fantastic role for finance professionals and accountants to actually drive value in an organization and have far more meaningful conversations than just simply reporting budget variances or forecast variances.
And I think that's a really good point. One of the areas that I'm quite passionate about is being a business partner that actually, from a finance business partner perspective, actually gets involved with the business. If you have the trust of the business, as you said, if I have the trust of the head of marketing, if I have the trust there, they know that I'm not just going to pull the money out from under them just because they didn't spend it. So the whole view, why they want to spend their $1 million or why they want to hold back, is because of rewards um, and areas that they perverse outcomes that have occurred because of the reward structures that are put in place. Now, if they're getting rewarded for coming in under budget, then they're going to want to come in under budget. Now, is that the right outcome for the business? If they're going to lose their funding next year because they came in under budget and therefore they just feel like they've got to spend their money, again, perverse outcome. What we need to tie is how are the outcomes from spending the money, etc., actually lining up with the business needs, and how do you actually have those really enriched conversations, which is I think where you were going. It's effectively how do we make sure that we're actually sitting there as a proper business partner and saying, look, you're the head of marketing, you've done this job. What do you need to actually achieve the outcomes, that 8 times multiple? How do we actually help you do that? How do I find the money to enable you to do that? How do I
Yep.
how do we go, great, this year you actually spent half the money we expected, and therefore, um, was that actually something that occurred because of a one-off? So you found an ad agency that was on the up and up, or that was starting out, and they came in at a low price, but next year that's just not going to happen. Um, how do we reward you for that good behavior, but also how do we make sure that you're not losing out next year
Yep.
because you happen to come in under budget? But how do we enable that? And marketing is a good
I
one,
have
but then anywhere, yeah.
Yeah, I have this really, someone said this to me early in my career that the world is run by really bad KPIs. And that's pretty much how what you're talking about feels like, because it's
Mm,
too hard, again, due to governance and things. The KPIs drive certain behaviors. So, and I think finance teams, and again, it aligns so nicely with this chief value officer concept. I think finance teams have this wonderful privilege of being one of those central teams that get to see the whole organization across the board. And we're the ones who can join the dots between different parts of organizations as accountants and as finance professionals to help that enabling conversation. I think where the opportunity is for
mm,
finance teams, though, is to dive deep into that conversation rather than just focus on reporting. One of the things we're doing at UNSW, where we're refreshing our accounting degree, is we've landed that we've redefined accounting, and what we've redefined accounting as accounting is understanding and running a successful business. And it's not about reporting, it's not about transactions, it's not about record keeping. It's about understanding and running a successful business. Everything else is an enabler to that.
yeah,
And what that means is, as finance professionals, we can then empower every key decision across an organization. So whether that be a strategic decision about growth, whether that be an operational decision about efficiency and optimization of processes, whether that be a commercial decision, which is obviously our domain of increasing profitability and value. So I think finance has this amazing opportunity to actually have a far bigger input and impact across an organization simply by virtue of where we sit and the skills that we have. And it's just a matter of applying it a certain way. And going back to the topic of today's conversation, though, about forecasting,
mm,
I think forecasting as a what you call as a verb is a skill that's really important for finance professionals to have, because we need to be able to see where things are heading if things keep going the way they are,
yeah,
and where they would go if we change a few things. What levers can we pull to change that? And then, secondly, which is probably the one that gets a bit left out in my view, and again, not as experienced in the finance domain as you are, Nick, but in my view, one of the areas where I think it gets left out a little bit is that conversation. I don't think finance business partners have enough of the delving into the business to become more of a trusted partner to actually jointly deliver some decisions and enable and empower the head of marketing in our example
mm,
to make certain decisions, and then also enable everyone else in the organization to understand that, hey, I've worked out across all the business operations, marketing is the best one for us to, for our particular scenario. Marketing is the best place for us to spend any spare cash we have, because we
yeah,
get an 8 times return. So you can then galvanize the whole organization to then value and view marketing a certain way. And you finance professionals can be the ones that unite the organizations to work in the same direction. So the impact we could have is just phenomenal. And I think moving away from a static budget, which I'm hoping not everyone has, to a more proactive financial management environment, whether you go as far as to updating your forecasts and budgets quarterly or not,
mm,
is a whole other conversation. But just that proactive nature of looking at drivers, looking at actions, looking at decisions, and facilitating that conversation and enabling that conversation, I think that's an awesome role for finance professionals to play.
and I think that's really important. I think when we started off on this journey of the chief value officer, one of the early observations was that to actually become the chief value officer, you really need to um, have the opportunity to work across the organization. So if you have an opportunity to jump into a different area and actually understand how marketing works by being a marketer for a little while before coming back to finance, you actually gain so many insights and have those rich conversations. And look, coming back to the title of this webinar, effectively, how do you build a value add forecast? It's effectively understanding the business units and how they operate. I think that conversation where you said that, or that point you made for him around businesses are run by terrible KPIs is so true. It's how do we actually understand and how do we enable better KPIs through utilizing our numbers, our knowledge of numbers, to then build up to really value add forecasts. If you're the head of engineering or the head of marketing or the head of any other division within an organization, and you come to me as the CFO and say, hey, I've got this great idea, but I'm going to need some funding to do it. Me saying, oh, well, it's not in the budget. Sorry, you'll have to wait till next year and then we might allocate is probably not the best idea. It's not the best for the business. How do we actually go, okay, let's test your
Yep.
idea? Like we can't just let it happen, but how do we test your idea? Then how do we fund it? And what does the funding look like? How do I actually take it from other areas? How do I make the funding work for you?
Yep.
I mean, the old
really like.
answer of also,
No, you go on. Sorry.
I was just gonna say the old idea of the CFO being Doctor No, basically saying no, no,
Yep.
you can't have funding. It's how do I
Yep.
actually enable you? It's
Yep.
how do I
One of
how do I give you the funding, but give you enough rope as well.
one of my clients referred to the finance team as the prevention of work department. And I was like, as an accountant, I was really upset. But I kind of understand it from his position because he was saying the exact same thing. I come in, I ask for something, it's always no, right?
Yeah,
And I think that communication is really important as to why it's a no is really important, and the why is really, really important. Um, my only suggestion there, and I say this to both our students at UNSW in accounting as well as finance professionals I work with, and actually, I've sat on boards before, and I encourage my fellow board members to think about this as well. Is to think of the net of the expenditure, not the expenditure itself. It's very easy to just look at a cost, and if you don't
yeah,
look at the upside, then I think that's a problem. So I think we need to get more into thinking about the net, the opportunity cost, the
mm,
alternatives, all of those sorts of things. Because, and I think we've spoken about this, Nick, at a previous webinar where we talked about risk and the appetite for finance teams not being allowed to fail, or at
yeah,
least that mindset that we're not allowed to fail. We are the safe pair of hands. Now, sometimes, and this is a social problem, and I think we're kind of experiencing it across many organizations, which is in society today, we punish people if they try something and it goes wrong more than we punish people who don't try anything. So it's safer to not do anything because there's no record of you having tried something and there's no record of something
yeah,
going wrong. It's very hard to record a missed opportunity.
yeah,
Whereas if you've tried something and it's gone wrong, it's very easy to record what you've tried and gone, that's a big loss that we've just made. But the loss that we've missed out on by not even trying kind of falls by the wayside. And you see this on boards of not-for-profits in particular the most, where
mm,
those board members do not want to be on the board when something goes wrong while they're on the board, right? So it's very easy for many board members to just not risk anything and just hold steady during their tenure and not approve risky things, right? And as a result, and then when by the time it all comes out in the wash, it was like, oh yeah, there were so many factors, and that's the reason we didn't get ahead. So I think finance is a really good example of where I'd love for us to be a bit more courageous as finance
mm,
professionals, where whether we carve out a small bit of the budget for experimentation, innovation, and things like that, or at the very least have a clear communication with the business that, look, we can do this, but here's the risk appetite. You'd have to have a pretty high risk appetite to try this. And if you
yeah.
are on board, I'm on board. Let's enable a structure, but we need more governance and more people on board with the idea before it's just my idea, yes or no.
I really like that, and I think it's a saying that I've heard a lot of recently, which is, you do nothing wrong. Um,
Yep.
so therefore, it's easier for me to do nothing. I think as well, you also get the risk aversion when we try something out and it does fail. Then the next thing gets, oh, we don't want to really try that.
Yep.
We've already failed at something and lost a bit of money. Well, yeah, you did, but that was in a different area. That was doing something else. Maybe what do we learn from that failure?
Yep.
I think that's a big thing.
And
Oh,
how do we commercialize that learning too? Like, I think
yeah,
ultimately, I don't think we need to go too far away from what we're after, which is a commercial return, right? A commercial outcome.
yeah,
But as long as we can work out what is that notion of value
mm,
commercially, I think that's really, really important. And we need to be able to, and I think as finance professionals, we've got the skills and the training to be able to have a go at quantifying that. And I think
yeah.
it's really important we articulate that value very well.
I think you also touched upon something here, and it does become important from a forecasting perspective as well, because in the end, the forecast is there. Building up the forecast, as we've said, is basically understanding how the business operates. It's understanding what the needs and wants of the business are. It's understanding the risk appetite. It's understanding what the KPIs are. It's understanding those elements. But I think you touched upon something that we see all the time, which is finance teams. Oh, I'd love a new piece of software. I'd love to upgrade this. I'd love to update that, but I'm not going to get funding through my board because it's not, they don't see the return. So one, you've actually got to be able to sell the return, the investment that's actually going to come through. So what is the actual return on investment that you're going to see from the finance side of things? We hate spending money on ourselves, it
Yep.
seems. Um, I always say, the finance team's the poor cousin of the business that doesn't get any funding or anything like that, because everyone just thinks it's a sinkhole for funding in terms of
Yep.
ERPs and things like that. The reality is, if you're a finance professional, you get a better ERP, you get a better planning tool, which comes back into this, you'll end up actually really, really adding value in the organization and basically being able to really, really get everyone to take ownership of their own budgets and forecasts as well. Use the
Yep.
business partnering models to help them understand what they can achieve, and then also give them the tools they can come into with their business cases,
Yeah.
etc. Like, I think this is really important, this part of the discussion where we say it's not just going out there and saying yes to everyone, like that's also important, but it's actually saying how do we make this work and where is it as a priority versus everyone else's priorities.
Yeah. There's a really cool concept you just triggered in my head on that. The notion of time. I think we really struggle to value time and intangible saving of time. And there's
Yeah,
usually two reasons for that. Like, so if I've freed up 10% of your time, for example, unless you have a way to monetize that in some way, shape, or form, like where you use that extra 10% of your time to generate more revenue, or you go down to a zero point 0.9 FTE, whichever way, unless there's a way to monetize that 10% saving, we don't see that intangible thing becoming a tangible thing.
yeah,
Whereas, so if I need to spend, I don't know, let's just say $5 million on a new system, and the only benefit of that $5 million new system is everybody's going to save 20% more time across the business, because that's an intangible, it's a tangible expense, but an intangible benefit. It's really hard for us to articulate the value of that. And then we don't have the KPIs and the structures, and we don't even have an understanding of our value drivers to realize that 20% of saving, if used efficiently, that 20% of time is worth this much to the organization. If all our
yeah,
salespeople had 20% more time, there's 20% more leads, there's 20% more sales. If our operations people had 20% more time, there's 20% more throughput. So I don't think we've mastered the art of articulating the value of an intangible thing like time. And I think that's probably a key reason we say no. Um, and then the second thing I wanted to mention in the context of time is, and in the context of forecasting, is it's also really, really important to understand the notion of lead times of an action. So you might have a 3-month forecast which says things are looking bad in 3 months' time, but your lead time might be 6 months. So the reality is, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it today.
Yeah.
Okay, it's too late. If your sales figures for next month are looking bad, like we're in April now, and in our business, Nick, I say this to my
Yeah.
team all the time. If our May sales figures are looking bad, it's too late now to do anything about it. All we can work on is like September, October, realistically, right?
Yeah.
Uh, like, let's be honest with that. So, no amount of forecasting is going to change May's figures now. It's too late. It's the 22nd of April. Right. Okay. So as you know, our sales cycles are somewhere between 6 and 9 months, right? From meeting
Yeah.
someone to doing something for them. So that notion is really important to understand as well, and to help businesses understand that as well. Because I get this a lot where I've got a client at the moment who has to deliver. They are funded to deliver programs, and they have to deliver, I think, each year like 150 workshops, and we're almost nearing the end of the financial year, and they're not going to hit 150 if they go on current trend, right? And every time in the last 3 months I've met with this team that delivers the workshops, and every time they've told me, no, I've got a spreadsheet, I've got it in hand, I'm going to hit my target by June, right? And we're now, each month we're getting by. It's now April, and I'm sure they're not going to hit their April target. We're going to get to May. They're probably not going to hit their May target. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, guys, it's already too late for June. Like this, I'm going to
Yeah.
meet with them next week, and I'm going to tell them, guys, it's already too late for June. Now it's a question of how much can we do, and what are we going to do with that excess funding that you haven't spent? And back to our initial conversation on what's the best use of that funding now. So it's a really interesting thing to be just aware of, uh, that concept of time in two ways. One being it's intangible and we got to learn to value it, and the second being everything has a lead time, and it takes
Yeah.
time to action something even if you have a forecast. And so again, us as finance professionals, it's that conversation and that education piece of what we're doing a forecast for.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. Otherwise, there's no point doing a forecast if you're just going to issue it and tell everyone, here's a forecast. That's where you're headed 3 months from now.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. I think you've triggered something else in my mind with time is one of the reasons why we are, dare I say it, a bit lazy. And I mean, I'll go back to the using the budget term, but the amount of companies I've gone into over time where their budget is last year plus a percentage, 3%, 5%,
Yep.
whatever it is. That's because they don't have the time to rebase their budget. And if you go, oh, let's do a zero based budget, let's go back into the business and understand, do a top down, bottom up. Let's go through that exercise. Oh, I don't have the time. But again, if we go, okay, let's get a better system in place. Yes, it's going to cost money, but if we get a better system in place, we get better planning tools in place, then we've got more time. Then we can sit down with each business unit and start understanding, okay, what is this year looking like? I mean, right now we're in the middle of economic volatility everywhere. If you
Yep.
sit down with your production managers, your sales managers, and go, guys, what's going on? How do we ride this storm? There are going to be winners and losers right now.
Yep.
But if you're tapped into your business and you can go, all right, how do we be dynamic here? How do we make sure that we're shutting off what we need to shut off now so that we can stop a bleed or we can do something that needs to happen? How do we redeploy resources into those opportunistic spaces as opposed to last year plus 5%?
Yep.
It's not going to operate in the next year or 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for us. It's not going to work for us. We need to be more dynamic, and that's where we need to actually use forecasting more for effectively.
I've like you've probably pictured from what I've been saying today, forecasting or the forecast as a noun for
Mm,
me is just one tool that enables this proactive mindset of the chief value
yeah,
officer, right? So and there's other tools in that toolkit as well, and I think forecasting is a really essential one. So I'm really glad you covered
yeah,
it in this series of webinars. Um, I think it's going to be really, really important for businesses to be quite what's the word? Agile. I don't want to use it in a
Mm,
technical sense, but being able to adapt. Because the elephant in the room, which I haven't mentioned until now, is AI, right? And
mm,
everyone, I'm sure, is hearing from their boards, how is AI going to influence? How do we use AI in our business, and what impact will AI have, and things like that. And if you are in a world of last year's budget plus 5%, which basically means you probably don't really understand fully how your business works right at this moment. You
yeah,
understand the version when you did your zero-based budget last plus 5%. Essentially, that's what you understand. You are essentially going to break the number one rule of the AI governance frameworks that are kind of becoming best practice at the moment, which is you're giving up control to the AI.
mm,
And that's going to have one of two issues. Number one, the AI is not going to work because AI still needs to be trained and pointed to and things like that. So it's not going. It's just going to guess what are the drivers of your organization. It's not going to work as well as it could with some coaching and training. And the second, I think, is even if it does work, you're now beholden to the AI's answer of what it thinks is best for your business, right? And I think that would be a real shame for finance professionals to not leverage AI as a tool to assist them to impact business value and almost give it up to AI and like essentially voluntarily make ourselves redundant in many ways. So I think it's really important that as finance professionals, we go on that journey of understanding the drivers of our business really, really quickly and really, really well, because now there are far greater tools at our disposal that we can then use to drive even more greater value. But we can't do that. We have to learn to walk before we can run. And it's really, really important. If you haven't done so now, I think the key takeaway for me from this um, webinar today is if you haven't started proactively forecasting or proactively thinking ahead on your budget, whichever version of forecasting you want to consider, whether it's a
yeah,
verb or a noun, I don't mind, whether you do it formally or not. If your mindset isn't one of thinking ahead, and if your mindset isn't one of value drivers and thinking of the net investment and the opportunities you are missing out on and not taking, I think with AI, that gap is going to hurt you even more.
yeah. I agree with that. No, but I think it's also important. You sort of touched upon this. Is every business ultimately does actually have its own USP, so its own unique selling point. There is the secret sauce that your business has that you at least believe you have against all of your competitors. Why do your customers come to you and not one of your competitors? The AI isn't necessarily going to understand that just yet. It's going to understand if we come back to you were mentioning for him, our world in professional consultancies, accounting firms, etc. There is a model that the AI will understand of what an accounting firm looks like, but it's not going to understand what BDO looks like necessarily just yet. It will probably learn. I'm not going to say that, but it's effectively what differentiates us to other firms, for instance,
Yep.
or a different firm that makes widgets
Yeah.
versus their
And
competitors.
I
I think
think,
that's really important.
and to your point about understanding BDO, and that's, I guess, similar to the
Mm.
point I was trying to make, and I probably didn't do
Yeah.
it well, is if we could teach the AI the unique bits of BDO, between us and AI, we would have a huge competitive
Yeah.
advantage. And I guess the counterpoint to what I was trying to make, or the alternative version of what I was trying to say, is that if we can't do that, we're missing out on this huge opportunity that some of our competitors might be able to do. And I think
Yeah.
that's the key here. I think finance, if there was ever an imperative for finance to get more proactive into financial management and driving value and business acumen and business decisions and influencing those,
Mm.
now is the opportunity cost of not doing it is going to be far
Yeah.
greater than it has ever been in this next couple of years as AI gets better and better.
I think that's really important to understand as well because it is a it's a big area that needs to be focused upon.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a really big element here in terms of how do you bring it in. I think that you mentioned it before, but governance is the first step. How do you actually have a governance model to manage it? And to be honest, if we come back to building a forecast, if you want to go down there, you need a governance model as to how you're going to build your forecast.
Yep.
You need governance in all these spaces. Now, a lot of finance professionals that I know of say, I'm going to struggle selling governance to my board or executive, but the amount of times that governance has failed and then the business has gone into a really bad spot, if not completely collapsed because we don't have proper governance, we just want to move fast. I think that's a really important lesson. Just always remember that. I think also coming back to trying things and failing, I think that's a really important thing. I think it's what you learn from the failure, as we said. If I'm sort of bringing all this back
Yep.
together, um, on that, I just always remember we had some fighter jet pilots come and talk to us once, and they talked about every single mission that they flew, whether it be a training mission, a proper mission, etc. They always do a retro. They always look back on the mission. And they said no mission is ever perfect. So even if something becomes a resounding success, yes, we fund it, yes, it all works, we always do a retro. What actually
Yep.
happened? And what do we learn? Where could we be better? Um, and the important thing that they came up with was not only is it the retro, it's everyone in the room has a voice and rank is gone. So you could have the
Nice.
CEO and then someone at the very low level all have an equal voice within that room in the retro. The
Yep.
other trick with the retro was that we have one thing, only one thing we can take up and improve. Because if we have a laundry list of 10, I think
It won't
everyone in
work.
this webinar knows if I've got 10 things, I'm not going to get them done within the time frame that we want. One thing.
Yep.
Can't even see my finger there, but I think it's really important to understand that. So it's there's a big we've sort of unpacked a lot of ideas here. I think
Yep.
it's really important to understand, you know, where we're coming from with building a really valuable forecast. You know, the amount of times, as I said, we see people just last year plus 5%. That's not going to cut it. Um, what you actually need to do is be dynamic, understand your business, understand
Yep.
how the operations of the business run, what the metrics are. As we said, if every dollar we spend in marketing yields $8 in return, we also have to understand where the diminishing returns start coming in as well, because that means I always remember speaking to a friend of mine whose father ran a garbage collection company, and very simply they found that every time they bought a new truck, they made more revenue. And so their model was just buy a new truck, buy a new truck, buy a new truck. But the law of diminishing returns means that you can't just keep on adding trucks.
Yep.
You need to keep on making sure that the services were being there. There was actually the operations were happening well. All
Yeah.
I
Scale takes investment as well, right?
yeah. And understanding, there's a lot of businesses out there that we talk about. You know, they start off as a small business. It's dynamic. It's exciting. The CFO is one of the people who can actually really get involved at a granular level. But as you
Yep.
grow, I mean, I've got a little rule of thumb, which is you can't have more than 8 direct reports, and that's probably too many. Um, you need to actually start putting governance and management layers in. And by that, I mean, that's really important when you're thinking about a forecast as we grow. Are you backing the forecast to grow? And how are you actually doing it? Are you actually starting to put in that management layer in between yourself as a business owner or a senior executive? And then are we growing that layer out? Are some of those people or heads now, are they actually AI? Is that actually what's going to happen as well?
At
Um,
least,
I'm,
at
I,
least AI assisted. Um, yeah, no, that's yeah. It's at least AI assisted is probably where we're gonna go, right?
AI assisted is probably the best way. Yep.
So in the healthcare field, for dentists, there's now a product in market called Second Opinion. So
Yeah.
the dentist does a scan of your mouth, they see the X-ray, and then the second opinion AI gets a read of that X-ray as well. The dentist doesn't show you the results, but the second opinion is at the dentist's disposal as well. So they can read that and also give you an opinion as well. And where it's going to head logically is the medical indemnity insurance that the dentist has. That provider is actually going to require that the dentist has that second opinion app going forward, because it's a requirement now that you have those sorts of tools at your disposal. Like, that's a logical trajectory of where we're headed. So I think not using AI to assist and inform decisions is a it's not going to happen. It's definitely going to happen, and we can already see that in cutting edge industries like Formula One and things like that. Like the amount of simulation modeling that happens live during a Formula One race, everything from weather to where to put a driver, when to bring them in, where they're going to land. They like simulate the race from every minute of the race is being simulated to the end, right? So that's, there you go. There's forecasting. In 2 hours, every minute they're forecasting the end of the race,
Yeah.
depending on the actions they. So yeah. So cutting edge industries have shown us where we are headed as well. There is another topic I just want to cover off on, Nick, and I'm mindful of the
Yeah.
time. We're at 13 minutes. And just a reminder to everyone in the audience, if you do want to ask any questions, there is a
Yeah.
questions tab. So please feel free to do that. Um, the one that I wanted to talk about as well, and I'm guilty of this myself, and my suggestion, it's about forming resentment on decisions. So the typical example is, I could come to you, let's say you're my CFO, Nick, and I'm, I don't know, head of operations. I come in and say, hey, I need a new project management tool. It's going to cost $4 million. It's not in the budget. I need it, please. It's really, really important. We're falling behind. We're losing XYZ money. Um, you could very easily say no, because it's a $4 million request outside of budget. I get it, and I could go away going, "Ah, bloody Nick doesn't get anything, doesn't is not enabling the business." You could also blindly say yes, which would probably be disastrous as well, because I just got $4 million without any analysis whatsoever on why I got $4 million. So the answer is going to lie somewhere in the middle of understanding the impact of that negative cash flow. And we're getting into cash flow modeling really, really
Mm.
quickly, right? And I think it's really important to explain to me as a non-financial person that, for him, you've asked for $4 million. By the way, if I give you $4 million now, one, we're going to have to borrow it, so there's interest on that. Two, we could have spent it with marketing, who would make $30 million from that four, but sure. And three, it's going to take you another 2 million on top of the four to implement this tool that you're talking about. So it's actually six you're asking for. And four, you've said you'll get some efficiencies. Let's model that out. And it looks like, yep, in 4 years' time, we get a net positive. And if you think this is a long-term tool that's going to last us 10 years, we can cash flow model that out and show you that, yep, over a 10-year horizon, this $4 million investment today is going to be a net positive gain of $8 million, but there's risk associated with that, yada, 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 yada. And based on all of that, I'm now going to have to put it forward. Either I'm the decision maker, or you're, like, you as the CFO, the decision maker, or you can go, look, for him, this is out of budget. We need to go to the board, and we're going to present a case of doing it versus not doing it. And me as head of operations will counter all of that by saying, Nick, if you don't spend the 4 million today, we're going to lose 50 million. We're going to lose a $50 million client, and there's $26 million of the profit gone, right? So don't say no just off the bat. But at least we're getting to a conversation about value drivers, cash flow impact,
Mm.
quantifying it, making it tangible, and putting two things forward and say, look, one option, no investment, is a negative loss of 26 million today. Option two is an investment of negative 4 million today, and over 10 years, we make that money back.
Yeah.
But there's risk associated. There's no guarantee we'll make that money back over the next 10 years. But at least we've had a really mature conversation about it. There's no case, no need for resentment. I understand where you're coming from. You understand where I'm coming from. And ultimately, the decision may not be either of ours. It needs to go to a bigger group under the governance structure. But at least we've played on the same side. And I think I'd love for finance teams and forecasting tools and any analysis finance teams do, I'd love the end result to be that. And it doesn't matter which decision we make as long as all parties fully understand the decision and then ultimately accept that it has gone up to a person with the responsibility and accountability to make the decision, and that person had all the information they needed to make that decision in an informed manner. And if after that they've made the decision, well, I mean, that's their role. They've made an informed decision. I think the frustration comes quite often
Mm.
in this scenario that I'm talking about, where you might feel, or I, as head of operations, might feel that the decision was made without all things being considered, and especially my perspective being considered. And I think tools like forecasting, the concept of a chief value officer, actually does consider that notion of informed decision making.
I
And
really
that's
like
kind
that.
of where I've been, yeah, and that's kind of where I've been playing in the data analytics space. Our data analytics offering is all about informed decision making. It's all about what analytics allows me to do is, because I've got more tools at my disposal and more techniques at my disposal, I can consider multiple variables and multiple scenarios at once and present multiple options and make sure that people are making a really well thought out decision. I don't influence the decision. I accept the decision with the person who's accountable for making the decision. That's above my pay grade. I get all of that. But at least I go to bed at night going, I've made my case and it was heard, and whatever the decision was the decision. And I think that's a really nice thing to aim towards with all of this, what we're aiming for, because ultimately
Mm.
we all have to work together and make collective decisions for the benefit of the organization that we work in.
And I think that's really important as well, that informed decision making. And I think when you're building up your forecasts and you're actually helping, I like to think about it as an enabler. How do I enable the business to operate better and more effectively? And then with your example, having that proper decision, like I could be the CFO, you're the operations manager. I've already had six other heads of in my office telling me, asking me for money, and you're the seventh coming in. But you don't know that I've had those six in there saying, I need $4 million as well. So when I go, oh, no, no, you can't have it, you get resentful to me without understanding that I'm actually trading off
Yep.
against the other six. And maybe it's about getting everyone in a room and saying, okay, Fahim wants this tool, sales wants X, marketing, blah, blah, all these different divisions want different things. Wait a minute. I also, I'm the finance lead. I want my own finance GL to be improved as well. Maybe there's an ERP that we can do. Maybe it's $10 million that we've got to spend, but maybe there are modules that can work together.
Yep.
Maybe you don't get 100% of what you want out of that single system. And we're talking systems, but it could be anything. But you don't get 100% of what you want, but at the same time, you get 80%. I
Yep.
get 70%, but we
Yep.
can actually have a decision that benefits the whole business. But you start understanding that because I brought you into the tent, so to
Yeah,
speak.
it's a holistic decision, not,
Mm,
and at least you're part of it. I think that's a really good point. The other
mm.
thing I'll just say, you've just triggered a memory for me, and it's probably you use the word resentment, so that's what triggered it for me. Um, if you are in a position in that example that we just gave, right? So you've had six other people ask for money. They said no. You're like now a bit flustered and a bit frustrated, and then I come in as the seventh one, and the timing of my request is bad. Now, I think that's in itself a problem. Like it should
Yeah,
never be a situation where the timing of my request is bad. You should be evaluating for the interest of the business, not based on your time, your feelings at the time. But we're all human, right? I get it.
yeah.
And this is probably speaking to a human behavior again as key finance decision makers or finance professionals in decision making positions. I think one thing I'd love everyone to take away, and I'd love for myself to remind myself, is when we don't know something, our default position is to say no, because that's the
Mm,
safer option. I would love for us to be comfortable not knowing and stay in the don't know mode. So
yeah.
rather than say no, just say I don't know yet. Okay? So just give me time to get to explore it and then I'll make my decision. I think we far too often we just say no. And we don't
Yeah.
realize the demoralizing impact of that on the people we say no to, number one. But number two, the commercial impact of that, that we haven't just evaluated the upside potential or the alternatives and things like that. So it's really just be very, very careful saying no instinctively. I think there's a way to go about that. Be comfortable sitting in the don't know.
Yeah. That's really, really good. I think that's a really good sort of sentiment to wrap up on. I think as I reflect on the conversation today, I think if people were thinking we were going to get involved in tools and geek out in Excel to show you how to build a model, I'm sorry, but that's not really value add. I don't see it as a value add. I think it's actually understanding the fundamentals to building up a forecast is ultimately um, through understanding the business drivers. It's understanding the forecast. I think from that perspective is a dynamic thing. It needs
Yep.
to move, it needs to breathe, it needs to be an enabler to the business. It needs to be underwritten by good KPIs. It needs to understand there's much more to a forecast than simply putting some numbers on a page and saying in 3 months' time for him, you're going to hit X amount of revenue and it's going to be at a gross margin of Y percent. Done. The old idea of adding 5% to last year, not going to cut it. Making sure you've got the time, the energy to actually devote to it. But then how do you have those really rich conversations to help enable the business to do what it needs to do? I think that's the underlying how do you actually build a value add forecast? It's actually much more, dare I say it, we talked about AI enablement, but also it's the human elements. It's actually understanding what is the USP of your business. It's understanding how do we drive value within the business. It's understanding where we're getting the best return for our money, but it's also understanding the different elements. So we did talk about, if we get 8 times return on funding marketing, for instance, you've also got to think about the downstream effects. If we start pumping all that business into the business, can we actually fulfill orders? What do we do there? Do we have to put on more heads and things like that? That's forecasting in a nutshell. So, yep, we've just increased our revenue eightfold. Amazing. How are we actually going to deliver it? And Fahim did mention before, we have our own forecasts in our business. There are times when I'm like, I don't have enough people to deliver the work that we've got. So I'm going to have to either say no, or I'm going to have to push you back, or I'm going to have to do something to manage that. And that's all forecasting. So I think forecasting doesn't need to be quarterly. It doesn't need to be 6 monthly. It's whatever the business cycle works for you. But forecasting can also be over a longer period of time and where you spend your effort too. I've seen forecasts that go out 18 months, but you spend your effort on the next 3 months with sort of predictive forecast going out to 18 months. I reckon you're spending 75% of your time on your first 3 months, then 10% on that next 3 months, and then the remainder of your time is spread across the year up following. But that's giving you a bit of a directional say. So look, just as I finish up here, Finn, do you have anything to add at the very end?
No, thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation. I hope everyone else did too.
No, thank you very much for joining. And as we said, it's a short week, so I hope everyone enjoys it. And thank you very much.